I never imagined my life to change completely when I was about to turn 40. I was in the textile business at the time, running my own company with my partner, Rafael, until he was diagnosed with HIV and passed away less than a year later in 1995, in July. There were few AIDS organizations in Venezuela at the time, so together with some friends and in Rafael's memory, we created Acción Solidaria, or Action for Solidarity, filling in gaps in terms of support and services for people with HIV. In spite of the prevailing stigma and discrimination, we were able to break through many barriers. Stigma and discrimination that affected gay men, commercial sex workers, people deprived of liberty, transgender women. But we broke through those barriers, cultural and social, and are still going on 20 years later. We have implemented many different programs. We built a clinic where we serve over 3,000 people a year, and we have also impacted public policy. However, stigma and discrimination are still a major issue in Venezuela and in many other parts of the world, as we know. In a survey we conducted around the country, 22% of those people with HIV that we interviewed told us that they still face various forms of serious discrimination. However, and very significantly for us, they also told us, 42% of them, that in organizations such as Acción Solidaria, they find a voice and the possibility to fight for their rights. I wasn't fully aware when I created Acción Solidaria what it would mean to be working in the field of HIV, but also in realizing my right to create an association and becoming part of the vast space of civil society where so many causes have been advanced and keep on being advanced daily. An association is born out of the desire of two or more individuals to effect change. We bring together our passion, our desires, our expectations, our creativity in order to effect such change. But an association is not only the aggregation of individuals, it is also the aggregation of individual rights, creating a collective entity that, just like a person, has the right to exist, to carry out its mission, to mobilize people around the cause, and to raise funds to remain viable. I wasn't aware at the time, as I said, of the world I was getting into, and it took me a while also to realize that in a context such as Venezuela's nowadays, creating an association would mean much more than just strategic planning, bringing in staff, working with volunteers, and serving the various and many diverse people that came knocking at our doors. As our government veered more and more towards authoritarian and undemocratic conducts, it also meant standing up together with others for our rights as civil society organizations to exist, to effect change, to serve others without undue government interference. We had to learn to work in an environment in which barriers, legal and policy, were used increasingly to suppress various forms of civil society organizations, from health, education, women's rights, LGBTI rights, indigenous peoples, and you name it. It's a long, long list. Therefore, in Venezuela, and wherever they occur, these barriers prevent the advancement of human rights, democratic liberties, and social justice. We also had to learn and get involved very deeply in what our rights were as associations, as they are recognized in international treaties on human rights that promote and protect collective action. We had to learn about freedom of association, importantly, for Acción Solidaria's own survival. Together with my board, my team, we analyzed the context and came to the conclusion that in order for Acción Solidaria to be effective in its work on HIV and AIDS, we had to fight for the broader decline of human rights in Venezuela. So put simply, this is what we learned, and we have been sharing now for quite a while with our colleagues working in very different spaces of civil society so that they can too know their rights as associations and offset threats. One, just as a person, by virtue of his or her existence, has rights and must be recognized an identity by the law, so too an association exists by the will of two or more individuals to create it. It too has rights, and it must be recognized as a legal entity. In Venezuela, however, the Observatory on the Rights of Women has not been able to register for over 2 years now, until they became aware that the right to freedom of association entails also the right to exist, but as well to get a registration without undue delays. They were not documenting such delays, and they thought that they were, part of the system. By now, they, together with many others, have been documenting such other cases, and we've been denouncing also these undue delays. Freedom of association does not only involve the right to exist and the right to register an association. An integral part of it is the right to carry out an association's mission. After all, this is why we create organizations, associations, civil society organizations, to carry out our missions, to serve others. Well, Transparency Venezuela put out a report last year on the performance of the members of Venezuelan parliament, and not very positive in many cases. The pro-government coalition created then a commission, and listen to this, in order to investigate organizations aiming at causing social commotion and a coup after this report was published. It was clear that the intention was to provoke self-censorship and to prevent others from carrying out their missions for fear of reprisal. We have documented many such other cases. Just as a person has the right to express him or herself and to participate in public matters, so too these rights are what gives a voice and the possibilities to associations to effect change. However, many different groups in Venezuela have been prevented now from having constructive dialogue with their government, working in children's and adolescents' rights, people deprived of liberty, and environmental rights. In 2008, we at Acción Solidaria were forbidden from ever going back to work on HIV in our prisons, only because we were documenting and denouncing the dire conditions in which our prisoners live. Venezuela has the highest death rate due to violence in prisons in our region, probably also around the world. Finally, just as a person has the right to procure his or her means for living, so too organizations have this right, and it's recognized by international cooperation agreements as well as by human rights declarations and resolutions. However, among other restrictions, the Venezuelan legislature adopted a law on national sovereignty that prevents organizations from carrying out activities such as promoting political rights and people's participation in public matters with international funding, or else face criminal prosecution. Since 2010, 34 organizations have had an open investigation for treason. I belong to 3 of them. So, what can we do? What have we done in order to continue doing what we're passionate about, what we believe in terms of human rights, in human dignity, in carrying out what we created our organizations for, and at the same time prevent the space of civil society from closing? One very concrete mechanism has been to implement the so-called 3 Ds in facing violations and restrictions in human rights: document, denounce, and divulge. Document, denounce, and divulge any attempt to close the civic space, as well as to prevent us from carrying on with our own work in our particular fields. So as Acción Solidaria, we regularly document our health department's lack of compliance with its obligation to provide antiretroviral medication for people with HIV. We're doing so just now. We continuously denounce such lack of compliance, both through our state institutions as well as through any other means that you can think of, including, of course, social media. And as well, we divulge this information, and with this, we're able to mobilize people with HIV, other organizations in the space of human rights, and civil society, as well as public opinion in defense of the right to health. At the same time, with our colleagues in civil society, we have documented all the legal and policy barriers that prevent us from carrying out our work. We have denounced them also nationally and internationally. And we have divulged what happens when these policy barriers are implemented, particularly because they affect vast sectors of society, particularly the most challenged from the point of view of social barriers and economic barriers. You may be aware that since February 4th, there has been a very extensive wave of protest in Venezuela, covering 28 cities in 21 of the 23 states, and provoking serious consequences in terms of human rights. Until February 17th, organizations started getting together in order to document the situation. And just until the past week, we have been able to document 42 people killed in the context of these protests, 2,380 arrests, 80% of them arbitrary, over 700 people wounded, including bystanders, and close to 80 cases of cruel, inhuman treatment, including torture. We have denounced this situation both nationally through our public ministry, as well as the Ombudsman's office, but also before international human rights entities such as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, as well as the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations on Human Rights. As well, we have divulged this situation widely. By sharing information, we have been able to reach individuals and institutions who have joined us in our calls for action. The Union of South American Nations is present now in Venezuela in a mediation process, which has been very important for us, started 2 weeks ago. As well, we have had organizations such as Amnesty International producing their own reports and sending our political actors very serious recommendations in terms of how to prevent any further violations to human rights, impunity, and ways to bring those responsible to justice. So in conclusion, whether you live in a country in conflict, in weakening democracies, such as I do, or where civil society strives, or if you live in a country that is democratic and open, where civil society thrives, we can do much together to promote and defend human rights. If you are striving, let's keep on documenting, denouncing, and divulging all of these attempts to close the civic space and preventing us from standing by the side of victims and working with the most challenged among us to defend their human rights. If you're striving, support us in documenting, denouncing, and divulging all such attempts to keep the space of civil society open together and continuing to work, again, collectively in advancing the cause of human dignity. Thank you.